Hi there. I'm Tracy Ellis Ross. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to host this conversation with Congresswoman Bass, or a Karen.
That's right.
I feel like I should call you Congresswoman, but anyway, a daughter of our great city, Karen Bass is running for mayor to solve Los Angeles's most pressing challenges. And Congresswoman Bass is a progressive pragmatist, a coalition builder who gets things done. She digs into challenges, finds solutions that address the root cause, and her life and career are defined by service and effective community driven action. When she sees a crisis, she runs towards it. Everybody else runs away, she runs towards it. And she ran towards the gang crisis when she worked in Los Angeles emergency rooms treating victims of violent crime. She ran towards the crack cocaine epidemic by founding Community Coalition, where she fought to make South Los Angeles a safer place. And from what I understand, my TV son is on the board there, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. When the recession hit, she helped save California from economic collapse as the first Black woman to ever serve as a speaker of any state assembly. And as a congresswoman, she led the effort to address the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color. And now she is coming home to make sure that we are not torn apart like so many places in our country, and to unite us to finding solutions to our greatest challenges: homelessness, public safety, the pandemic, the cost of living, the lack of middle class jobs and opportunity, and the need to reform city government. So please welcome Congresswoman Karen Bass. I'm so grateful to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful to be in conversation with you and just so admire your body of work. Love to see you perform, and I'm very honored that you participate like this today.
Very happy to. I am a very engaged American citizen, and I find that the more I'm in these kinds of conversations, the more I learn. And I think there's so much for all of us to learn from you and to hear about you. So I have some questions. Should we dive into some questions?
Absolutely, I'm ready.
All right. So over the last few years, the political climate, oh my, has been very jarring, and many of us have gotten tired, honestly. And I think it's understandable between the pandemic and the disconnect that's happening and the discord that's happening. So, can you talk about what inspired you to run for mayor, and in your own inspiration, how you can help to keep us all awake and inspired to stay connected and involved with what's happening in our country and in Los Angeles?
Well, absolutely. And Tracy, everything that you just said is part of what inspires me. And let me just add something else. The 4 years of trauma that we all went through in the last administration, where there were things that we thought were settled issues in our country. And we came away from those 4 years realizing nothing is settled. And that is one of the drivers that makes me come home, because people are so concerned right now, and they're demoralized and they're angry. 40,000 people who were unhoused in our city. And did you know that African Americans are only 9% of the population, but we are 40% of the people who are unhoused? 1,500 people died in 2020 on our streets. Just the other day, a man died, passed away in his wheelchair. And so those problems is what makes me feel as though we need to come together in the city, just like we did in 1994. After we had the Northridge earthquake, everybody just went into action. The whole city came together and we fixed what was broken, from freeways to homes to hospitals. We all came together. That's the way we need to view the crisis today. And so that's why I'm coming home. I've spent the last several decades focused on building coalitions across race, class, ideology, geography, and heck, I work in Congress building coalitions with Republicans. And I figure if I can master that and do bipartisan legislation, I can come home and build on years of experience of bringing people together, a background in healthcare, and 50% of the people who are sleeping on our streets are there for health reasons, be it substance abuse, mental illness, or chronic disease. So we have to get people off the street, but we also have to address why they were on the street to begin with. And that's why I'm coming home.
I said that in my little introduction to you, but what I do know of you is that you really are a person who's not interested in band-aid solutions, that you really look at the root cause of why these situations are where they are and how do we fix what has started that. So I love that you said that. And the other thing that you just said that I hadn't dawned on me, and I'm really grateful for the way you frame that. Yes, we're coming out of, it was 4 years of that administration that had beat us up. And then we moved into the pandemic. So the combination really fatigued people, and people are in a lot of trauma. But what you said that was so interesting is that so many things that we had thought were solved or were a given, we discovered in the last administration were not. And I think that's actually an indication, and something that woke me up. We have to stay active as civilians, as Americans, to voting, because in order to keep this country on the course we want it to be on, democracy means we all are involved. And so thank you so much for making that point that way, because I think it's something that will help to energize people as to why, even with fatigue, we have to stay active.
And one of the reasons why people get demoralized is because politicians just keep doing band-aids and people don't see the problem solved. And that's why in the political process, when people just run and they're basing it on slogans and really not delving and helping to explain to people what the problems are and what the real solutions are, and that the solutions are hard, but that they're doable, then people get demoralized because they say, well, hey, I did this and it's still the same. And I think that it's my job to explain the difference and to say that we're not just going to do this in a political manner. We're going to do this in a manner that actually solves the problem.
Very grateful for that. I've seen you at work a couple times, and I do know that's the way you work. So, so all of us in this city have had a personal reaction to seeing the crime rise.
Right.
And that's mainly, and I know you because your experience with combating it up close. When you were working in the ER, you treated victims of violent crime. When you worked in South LA, you organized the neighborhoods and worked with the LAPD to support programs to decrease crime. Can you talk about your plan to address crime in the city? And the other part of that question for me is, is it the pandemic that has changed this rise in crime, or is there something else happening that you need to address? Because it really has been a shift.
Right. It's been a shift. It's sudden. And unfortunately, there were just some horrific, really high profile crimes. And that's when you get into dangerous political territory, because when you do have horrific, high profile crimes, politicians want to rush with those band-aid solutions again and don't really look at the root causes. I think it's going to take us a while to understand what is going on, because there's crime, but there's also been an increase in road rage. People have been buying guns like crazy. There's been a lot of the violent crime has been domestic disputes, not necessarily gang violence or anything like that, or that's there too. So I think it's going to take us a minute to really look at the ways the pandemic impacted us. We know it profoundly impacted mental health. We know it impacted substance abuse. And I have a feeling that in a couple of years, we'll have a better analysis. But in the moment now, we have to address the problem. And so we come to the reality, if somebody commits a crime, they have to be held accountable. We have to do that. But I'm concerned in holding people accountable, but preventing future crimes. And what that means is we have to invest in communities. We have to do very proven methods of crime prevention. We actually know how to do this, but we have been, as a society, unwilling to make the investment to deal with crime. And let me just give you one very big example.
Please.
Mental health. Right now, the largest, most expensive mental health institution in the country exists in downtown Los Angeles. Guess what it is? It's the county jail. That's what we have for people that are mentally ill. Twin Towers. We deinstitutionalize people, but we never built an adequate system. And so those high profile crimes that have been committed, not all of them, but some of them have clearly been committed by people who are profoundly mentally ill. And so the question for our society is, have we finally reached a tipping point where instead of spending 10 times the amount of money you need to build a jail, we actually take care of people before they deteriorate to the point where they become violent.
That's heartbreaking. And a statistic that I don't think I realized, similar to the one about the unhoused. By the way, is that the correct way to say that as opposed to homelessness, unhoused?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And I think it's because people really want to describe it as a temporary condition.
Yeah.
It's not a permanent situation. And so that's why people prefer, unhoused, and, you tend to go back and forth. But the most important thing is to understand that the people who are under those tents are not a monolith. There's categories of folks that are there. People who have mental illness, people who have substance abuse, veterans, people who are homeless, unhoused for economic reasons, former foster youth. After you age out of the foster care system, when you turn 18, as a society, we essentially put you out on the street. And then we're shocked that you wind up incarcerated or not doing well. People who were formerly incarcerated, we've decided to release people now, but we didn't plan for them when they came home.
For
And
how, yeah.
when we went through all of our years of just, being tough on crime, we sentenced people to long time, jail sentences, but 85% of the people that are incarcerated come home. But politicians, what they did is they passed all kinds of laws to continue punishing people when they get out. They can't get a driver's license, they can't get a job, they can't get a place to live. They might not even be able to go home with their families, because if their families have a Section 8 voucher, they can't have somebody there who was a felon, or if they have family members. And by the way, all of this incarceration is concentrated in certain zip codes. So we wind up creating our own problems when we do Band-Aid solutions. And I believe that one of the reasons why we have the problems we do today is because of bad policies that were passed during the 90s, when all we wanted to do was punish people.
Well, I thank you for explaining that, and also breaking down that it's about preventative as
Yes.
opposed to just putting people in jail. And I imagine that also is a holistic approach that really addresses the experience that people are having and what they're living in, as opposed to what they're doing.
Exactly.
And that changes that. So that's a very helpful way to look at it. And we hope that you can help us. In 2016, you told the Washington Post that in politics, it's men who are the emotional ones. I love this question, which I know is something a lot of us deal with in our own professions. How are you able to get things done in Congress, dealing with so many different personalities in such an incredibly polarizing time? And I do know this of you, that you are a very pragmatic communicator that is really about effective solution, as opposed to just sort of plowing your way through and deciding a they versus us. So can you talk about how you get things done dealing with all these different personalities?
Sure. Yes, I was describing what it was like to be in charge of the legislature. And Tracy, I don't know how women got pegged with being hysterical.
I don't understand it. It really is hilarious. You're just like, okay. Anyway, please continue.
Exactly. Because I found myself spending an awful lot of time trying to calm men down. It'll be okay. We'll get through this.
They're also, I'm sorry, it's so rude, but they're good at tantrums. I'm sorry, there's a lot of
Exactly.
tantruming. Okay.
Exactly. And I frankly have a belief that past the age of 2, no one should have a tantrum.
Nope.
But I have a couple of mottos. I keep my eyes on the prize. I am very focused on what I want to do. So let me tell you what I'm working on now.
Yeah.
In Congress, I am working on very comprehensive legislation to address women in the criminal justice system, because criminal justice reform has really only been about men. It has not been about women. It has not been about children. And the circumstances for women and children are completely different. So I have a bill that's comprehensive. It looks at why women get arrested, what happens to them when they are incarcerated, because most women that are incarcerated are mothers, what happens to their children, what happens to their family when they get released. When women go to prison, by the way, no one visits them. When men go to prison, women visit men. And they're disconnected from their children wind up in foster care, et cetera. And so I approached a few of the Republican women to co-sponsor it with me, but unfortunately they wouldn't. So I went to the Republican men, and I started by looking at pregnancy in prison, because a lot of my colleagues had no idea that women were pregnant in prison and the horrific way they are treated. And
Yep.
so we started with that. You know, you probably know, Tracy, that until a couple of years ago in federal prisons, when a woman went into labor, she was literally chained to her gurney, because, you know, we worry about women escaping during labor when you can
Yeah,
barely
because
walk.
that's exactly what they're doing. Yep.
Exactly. You can barely walk at 8 and 9 months. And so we banned that in federal prisons. I do tell you, though, that it does go on in prisons. As a matter of fact, there's a prison in California that has really come under scrutiny because of all of the rape and sexual assaults that was taking place, including the warden. And so these kind of egregious situations happen around the country. And given that we're in a situation now where people are like, maybe criminal justice reform, we shouldn't do it. But when you inject gender in it, people then look at it a little different. And so bringing folks together, looking at ways where we can work together, and then compartmentalizing. So I work with some of the most conservative Republicans, but when we're focusing on something, we're just talking about that. And you compartmentalize, you keep your eyes on the prize, and you understand that your goal is really to make a difference, not just to make a point, not to do grandstanding so the press will cover you. It's about getting something done.
Make a difference, not make a point is really key. Can we spend just a little bit more time on women, incarcerated women? Because there's
Yes,
a statistic that I read that the rate of women being incarcerated is growing
right.
at a really fast pace. And we know that women, Black women particularly, are usually the breadwinners in the family, and they are the ones that the family is dependent on. And so I would imagine that the trickle down from that and those rates rising is really affecting those communities in a very hard way, whether it's children having to go into foster care or any of those different things.
Well, 50% of children who have a parent incarcerated wind up incarcerated. What society doesn't think about when they get angry and want to get tough on crime, they don't think about the collateral damage of when you incarcerate someone. You
Yeah.
really incarcerate the entire family. Again, people have to be held accountable. But we also, as a society, need to think about the consequences. So, for example, women are very rarely incarcerated for violent crime. 9 times out of 10, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, are incarcerated because of their relationships with men. Either it's whether it's drug trafficking, whether it's a financial crime, whether it's domestic violence, women wind up incarcerated because of their relationships with men. Well, if it's not violent crime, do we actually need to incarcerate them? And because fewer women are incarcerated, they're typically incarcerated very far away from their families. Can we have halfway houses? Can we use electronic monitoring? Can we think about what is going to happen to the kids when they are incarcerated? So my legislation basically says we need to do that. We need to think about these things because of the collateral damage that is done when women are incarcerated.
I'm sorry, I have another question that is not planned,
Sure.
but when you are creating legislation, and like the things you talk about, are they solvable? Is it,
Yes.
they are. And so is it about really being extremely mindful of all of the aspects of what you are laying out in the legislation, and then really keeping your eye on that prize? Because it's like as a civilian, as a layman, I think to myself, I mean, but how do you change that stuff? And is it just policy that starts to make that difference?
Well, you know, one of the things that really inspires me and keeps me motivated, but also frustrates me at the same time,
Hmm.
is that many of these situations are so solvable. We
Okay.
know the research, we know how to get it done. We have programs that are infected, that are effective. It all boils down to political will, meaning in our country, we just don't we just decide not to invest in people. Our
Wow.
where we choose to invest is off. We will invest in a prison in a minute, and we will not address in a community-based program to handle people with mental illness. Now, in part, that's because of the political process, because politicians don't get elected for prevention. Prevention means something didn't happen, and politicians want to see something happen. But I also believe that I don't care what policy you pass, it can be the best policy in the world. If you don't have people on the outside in the community making sure that the policy is implemented right away, then in the right way, then you can't really expect change to happen. So I think one of the things that we suffer from as Americans, and it's a part of our American culture, we're very apolitical. We think civic involvement means you vote. We're not invested in the political process in terms of holding elected officials like myself accountable,
Hmm.
getting involved when you hear that legislation is passed to see how you might be helpful. When it comes to the question of the unhoused, I truly believe the best way to do it is for everybody to get involved and say that we've got to solve this problem together as a city, and all of us need to sacrifice a little because we have to make room for those people that are sleeping on the streets. We have to make room
Absolutely.
for them in our neighborhoods. And I'm hoping that my campaign inspires people to get involved by building a citywide coalition, a grassroots movement that says this is 1994, this is an earthquake, this is a man-made disaster this time, and we're going to come together just like we did during a natural disaster.
That's really amazing. And it also brings us right to this question around we talk about the unhoused in Los Angeles, and you released a plan last month that had a unique attention on mental health. Can
Yes.
you share a little bit how you're going to address what may feel like an overwhelming issue facing this city, specifically around mental health?
Sure. I actually went to a hospital to hold a press conference. The hospital I went to is empty. It has 344 beds. It is in pristine condition. You know what
Okay.
it's used for, Tracy?
What?
Film location.
Stop it.
It is used for film location. It's St. Vincent Hospital.
Is
The
it in Burbank?
no, on Beverly Boulevard near downtown LA.
Okay.
And a hospital scenes, take place
That's
there.
embarrassing.
Well, we need lots of film locations, but I'd rather those 344 beds be filled with people with
Who
substance
need
abuse and
them?
mental
Who need
illness.
them? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the owner of the hospital has been trying to lease it to the county or the city for 5 years and just can't find his way through the bureaucracy. One of the reasons why I'm running is because I want to get rid of the bureaucracy that would hold people back. People are dying on the streets because they don't have a bed. And in the 90s, we actually had a whole layer of substance abuse treatment programs in the city, and especially in South LA, where you could go and stay for a year. And afterwards, you would go into a sober living situation. And we changed our healthcare system. We professionalized it. So now you only have 30 days. If you've been on the street addicted or mentally ill
30
for
days isn't going to
years,
do anything.
30 days is not going to do a thing. And by the way, after 30 days, we put you back out on the street.
Yeah. And,
So
and oof, wow.
that system is completely broken. And so now, because I'm in Congress for the rest of the year, I've not quit. I'm working because we have an administration that will actually answer our phone calls. During the Trump years, they were ordered not to return phone calls from Democrats. Now we have an administration who is committed to racial equity, who is committed to justice. And so I'm trying to work with the administration right now to say, how do we deal with some of these rules that meant that substance abuse programs were only 30 days? And so I think that all of this is achievable, but you just have to focus on it and say, this is where I'm going to plant my flag. One of the other things that happens in our city and our county is communication like this. One points to the other. Well, we can't do substance abuse. We're the city. That's what the county does. Who says we can't? Who says we can't? I believe there's tremendous wealth in this city. There's tremendous wealth in our country. Whether it comes from the city budget or whether I have to go out and raise the money, I think we can get these things done. I think we just need to have a commitment to deliver for the people and to say, I'm just not going to accept the bureaucracy.
I think you said something really key. Why can't we? And I think so often people are just like, well, that's not the way it's done, or
Yeah.
that's not the way we've done it, or that seems hard. And all of those pathways to solution get avoided and missed. So, in that vein, how will you bring people together as mayor so that, as you said, you can engage all of us to invest in our own communities, make sure that our elected officials are held accountable, but also that our elected officials are actually serving the community and addressing these many, many issues that have come up post COVID and that we're living in right now. We're not post COVID, but in COVID, um, so that we can all come together and really get back on track here. What are some of the top things you're going to do?
Well, Tracy, that's the benefit of a political campaign, actually. Campaigns can be really inspirational and exciting and motivating, and you use it as an excuse to bring people together. Now, we've seen the other side of it too. Campaigns can be extremely destructive, tear people apart, have people at each other. And so what I plan to do is build on 30 plus years of coalition building for different issues. And so over the years, when I first started out in 1990 at Community Coalition, we didn't have the level of sophistication that activists do today. We didn't have organizations all over the city that focus on social justice work. We didn't have the layer of other services and supports that exist. And so bringing all of those people together, and I'm in the process of doing that now, and I want to use my campaign to do that. People come together on campaigns, they know they're short-lived, it's an opportunity, it's concrete, there's specific things that you can do. And so I plan to work that way. One of the first activities we're going to do is we're going to participate in the homeless count. That's when you go out like at 9 o'clock at night. It's very structured, very organized, safe, and you literally count the people that are in tents, are unhoused. They might be in recreational vehicles, et cetera. And so we're going to go out, we're going to mobilize and send people out. And that'll be an activity for people to be up close and personal, not looking at the person in the tent when you're driving by, but actually looking inside that tent, talking to that person, finding out what's going on. We haven't done the count for 2 years because of COVID.
Wow.
So when we say there's 40,000 people homeless, that could
Know.
be a very inaccurate number. And that's just the city. That's not counting the 20 additional thousand people in the county. So in total in LA County, 2 years ago, there were 60,000 people unhoused. We will find out in another month or so how many people are actually unhoused today. Now, my concern is it might be many more. But at the same time, as we're trying to get people off the street, we have to prevent the next wave of people who are one paycheck or less away from falling into homelessness.
Yeah. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Me too.
Congresswoman Bass, you are a progressive pragmatist and a coalition builder who gets things done. I am excited for you to come home and run for mayor. In the meantime, you're not quitting your day job.
Nope.
And you're going to stay out there doing your thing on our behalf in DC. And I'm just really grateful for your solution-oriented mind and your ability to communicate and keep your eye on the prize, and instead of on the prize instead of making a point.
Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of you taking the time out with me today.
Thank you.